with all these gains, second wave feminism and the feminist movement reached its pinnacle in the 1970s. It's sometimes called the she decade. And nothing demonstrated these achievements more than two things. First was the creation of the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971 to unite the two strains of public and private feminism. And to emphasize that it united the two strains, two of the co-founders were both Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan, among a lot of other women too. The objective of the National Women's Political Caucus was, it's still around today, and it's meant to be a nonpartisan, multicultural organization that supports women candidates running for office regardless of political affiliation. That is ostensibly the objective. Now, I say ostensibly because the goal is to improve women's status by amplifying their voice in government, but an important objective is also increasing the number of pro-choice candidates, or women that support abortion rights. So ostensibly it is without political affiliation, but abortion is such a hot topic that such a divisive topic, and it is very divided down party lines. But the objective, the main objective, is more women in politics. And at the inaugural conference where they created the organization, Gloria Steinem will give the keynote address. It's called the Address to the Women of America, and it is very often considered one of the most influential speeches of the 20th century. This is no simple reform. It really is a revolution. Sex and race, because they are easy, visible differences, have been the primary ways of organizing human beings into superior and inferior groups and into the cheap labor on which this system still depends. We are talking about a society in which there will be no roles other than those chosen or those earned. We are really talking about humanism. And she fills the concept that I introduced at the very beginning of this lecture on the head, that humans throughout history, all over the globe, have differentiated based on sex and race. And that is just a consistent theme of human existence. So the creation of the organization was a huge, huge part of combining the different parts of the feminist movement, and was considered a major turning point for the feminist movement, as was the push for a new constitutional amendment guaranteeing women equality under the law, called the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, was first introduced by a woman named Alice Paul, which she was a major reason for women gaining the right to vote, and was first introduced in 1923. And it guarantees equal protection under the law for all Americans on the basis of sex. In 1972, the ERA was reintroduced to Congress and passed very easily. It passed Congress incredibly easily, with very few people voting against it. So it was wildly popular when it first passed in 1972, and then it went to the states for ratification. As you know, for a constitutional amendment to be added, it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, and it got a lot of support really quickly. Texas ratified it in 1972, and when it was introduced, it had a 7-year deadline, so it had to be ratified by 1979, and by 1977, so with 2 years to go, it had 35 of the 38 states needed. So it was only 3 states away. And it had bipartisan support. And by bipartisan support, I mean by both parties throughout part of the first half of the 1970s, and both houses of Congress, and President Nixon, President Ford, both Republicans, President Carter. So it had widespread support. The text is incredibly simple. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So it is a very, very simple amendment in terms of its language. And it looked like it was absolutely going to be ratified. But 2 major factors will contribute to the end of both the ERA and second wave feminism. And the first was internal. Second wave feminism will be broken up because of internal struggles due to radicalism and just disputes among women's groups. In terms of radicalism, like with the civil rights movement and the Black Panthers, there will be a faction of the women's movement that is very radical and were self-proclaimed radicals. So they called themselves radical. And there were several, but the most important was a group called the Red Stockings. Red Stockings of the Women's Liberation Movement, but just the Red Stockings for short. It was a radical feminist group that said all men oppress all women, and men need to give up their power. This is where the down with the patriarchy comes from. The group derived its name from feminist intellectuals in the 18th century in Europe. They were called blue stockings to make fun of them. So it was blue stockings was a derogatory term, but these feminists embraced it, and they called themselves red stocking to emphasize how revolutionary they were and that they supported revolutionary change. They were incredibly critical of Betty Friedan and the National Organization of Women, or NOW. They said they now was trying to make institutional reforms while ignoring the interpersonal power dynamics between men and women. And in something that my mind is not capable of understanding, they were also opposed to male homosexuality because they said it was a misogynistic rejection of women. So that I cannot understand that. I'm not smart enough to understand it. I think that's a fair way to put it. They will gain a lot of attention, and they gained national attention and actually worldwide attention in 1968 when they protested the Miss American pageant. Protested the Miss American pageant in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and they just got so much attention. Cameras just love this. News agencies love this, and the whole world got to see this. It got worldwide media attention. Welcome to Miss America cattle auction. And really importantly, they had a freedom trash can where they would throw objects of female oppression into, like hairspray, makeup, corsets, fake eyelashes, mops, and very importantly, bras. One journalist said it was reminiscent of the bra burning, or of the burning of draft cards during the Vietnam War protest, and that is where the bra burning whole thing comes from. They weren't actually burning bras, and as far as I know, and there is not an example of bra burning specifically, but this is where the term comes from. Now, like all radical movements, this was a minority of the feminist movement. So it's a small part of the feminist movement, but it's always the radicals. It's always the loudest ones that they get the most attention. So this obviously was much more radical than a lot of feminists were even comfortable with. And then there will be internal division. And the internal division, besides just of radicals versus not radicals, especially involved what are called the sex wars. There will be feminist sex wars in the 1980s that will mark the end of second wave feminism. And it's said to have started in 1980 when Now came out against several things like pedophilia and most importantly, pornography and sadomasochism. They said those were exploitative, they were violent, and they came out definitively against those things. And this will divide the women's movement, especially a conference that was held at Barnard College in New York. It's a small liberal arts school for women. And the Barnard Conference on sexuality was supposed to be about moving beyond the debates about just violence and pornography and talk about sexuality and apart from reproduction. That is the most I know about it, and I really do not know what the discussion was about. But what's really important was the people that came out to protest it. They were other feminists that were part of a growing movement called Women Against Pornography, or WAP, W-A-P. The anti-pornography rallies outside of the event were notable, and they got a lot of attention and showed that the feminist movement, second wave feminism, had come to an end. This event is usually considered the end of second wave feminism. Supposedly it's the beginning of third wave feminism. I have heard that we are on eighth wave feminism, and I have no idea. So that is a whole field of study in itself, but this is often considered the end of second wave feminism. So the internal divisions, that was a big part of the decline of the feminist movement. But a bigger one was the external factors, specifically the conservative backlash against feminism, against Roe v. Wade, and against the ERA. And in this case, you can put one person at the head of that. Her name is Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis Schlafly will lead the conservative opposition to Roe v. Wade, the ERA, and feminism in general. She was a staunchly conservative Catholic mother of six and a political activist. She had some political experience. She had supported Barry Goldwater in 1964, in the 1964 presidential election against LBJ. Barry Goldwater in 1964, he was considered very, very radical for the time. But Phyllis Schlafly will become the face of the anti-feminist movement. And she was a brilliant, brilliant organizer because she was a lawyer. So she had a law degree. So she was incredibly bright and really good at organizing. And she'll lead the fight against the ERA and against feminism in general. She'll form what's called the Eagle Forum, and it's a counter-feminist organization. Eagle Forum was the most important, but there were several of them. There's one called Women Who Want to Be Women, and another one called Females Opposed to Equality. And anti-feminism was a big part of it, but that wasn't the only part of Phyllis Schlafly and the Eagle Forum. It was anti-feminist, it was anti-abortion, it was anti-liberal, it was anti-homosexual, and it was anti-immigrant. And Phyllis Schlafly, she will lead the fight against feminism for traditional gender roles. And she made a lot of statements that she said, I like to say this because it pisses off the liberals. Specifically, the first one, I have canceled speeches whenever my husband thought I had been away from home too much. She would say that very often after saying, I love saying this because it pisses off the liberals. She also will argue against the marital rape laws. And one of the biggest arguments that were incredibly effective for a lot of women against the ERA was that it would mean women would have to fight in wars and women would be part of the draft. So she will get a huge following. And as a generalization, a lot of the second wave feminist movement were middle-class white women, and there were a lot of African-American women, feminist movement, there were Chicana feminist movement. So there's a lot more, but the mainstream of it were middle-class white women. The anti-feminist movement, the anti-ERA, were in general middle-aged, and as a generalization, a lot of them were not college-educated housewives from in middle age. So they tended to be older. They tended to not have college degrees, and a lot of them were stay-at-home wives and from working-class families. So it was. This is where that whole anecdotal fallacy comes in. There, of course, those are broad generalizations, but the demographics, the overall numbers, show that there are exceptions, but those were the general differences. Without Phyllis Schlafly, the ERA is widely agreed. It is widely agreed it would have passed. But she organized such an effective counter-ERA organization that after 1977, only 3 states were needed to pass the ERA, and not only did they not get 3 more states, but several states will rescind their support for the ERA. So the ERA will fail. To this day, there are still attempts to bring it back up, but ERA was never passed, was never ratified, and Phyllis Schlafly is the reason. And that is not overstating her significance in in organizing the movement, because that's what she was really brilliant about. I saw an interview with her 2 months before she passed away in 2016, and in 2016 when asked what is wrong with the United States, she said the feminist movement. Feminist movement had caused all the problems that had come, that had caused all the problems that we're experiencing in the United States today. So she will be the leader of the anti-feminist movement until the end of her life. To summarize the feminist movement and second wave feminism. Second wave feminism is, in one sense, in one aspect, like the New Deal. People have insanely strong opinions about it without knowing anything about it. And there are so many pieces of legislation, so many laws, so many Supreme Court decisions that it is very unlikely that if you go point by point, it is very unlikely that anyone will find the entire thing to be bad and everything about it to be bad. There are certain pieces of legislation that virtually everyone can agree were positive, such as Title IX and women being able to go to college and get degrees. To summarize second wave feminism is very difficult because obviously we are talking about half of the population. And what's more, this is the largest example of a previously legally oppressed group breaking free of those laws. Obviously, this happens all over the world, but the women's movement of the last 50 years, it is the largest social movement in human history because of just the percentage of the population that is affected. Because the changes that come from this, especially women in the workforce, affect everything about society. It affects everything about family life, child rearing, marriage, divorce, everything about sex, love, dating. Everything about society has been altered by this in some way, shape, or form. So there's a lot that can be said about it, but just a couple of important points. The ERA will ultimately fail, but the second wave feminism will have massive consequences in terms especially of women in college, getting an education, and in the workforce. And in those areas, the numbers are fairly staggering. There's a book called The Richer Sex. It is not at all implying women are superior to men. It is just going into the numbers and into the data about where women are. And women are doing very well in a lot of ways. I mean, everyone is struggling in certain ways, and I'm not at all implying women are just doing phenomenally well and are having it easy. But the numbers are very telling. For example, the amount of Americans with a bachelor's degree in 1972, males outperformed women by 13%. As of 2022, the numbers are essentially reversed. So there is still a gap now it's 15%, but now it is in the opposite direction. And women are outperforming men in college and getting degrees. And they are getting significantly more PhDs, significantly more law degrees, medical degrees, and the amount of women getting advanced degrees is risen just exponentially. from in 1970, it was a little over 10% of 10% of all PhDs in law degrees to over 50%. And that is true of all graduate degrees, virtually all, not all, but a lot of graduate degrees overall, women are outperforming men. And that is really important because it means women are doing better economically. As of 2022, the amount of women that are either providing us the same amount as their husband or providing more money in the household as their husbands is about equal to males. So economically, educationally and economically, women have made massive, massive gains. And this is very important to understand because it is having a huge, huge effect on everything about gender roles and gender relationships. Now, it is not accurate to say that women are getting all these things because they are getting just given this stuff, and that all these laws, Title IX, are making it easier for women than for men. Humans generally like to find a scapegoat, something to blame for why. This is a whole other discussion that I will, in my concluding video, I will talk about. But males are struggling in a lot of ways. And there is a tendency to say that males are struggling because the system is making it much easier for women and much harder for men. And that is not accurate. The major reason that women are doing so well is because our economy has changed. The United States is no longer a manufacturing-based economy. And we'll talk about this more, but it has become a knowledge and services-based economy. Manufacturing makes up something like 9 or 10% of the U.S. economy. And it's not because the U.S. has just exported jobs. It's because we are going through an economic and technological revolution like the one we discussed at the beginning of the semester, when we went from an agricultural-based economy to a manufacturing-based economy. In a manufacturing-based economy, males are going to do better. They did better. And the reduction in the demand for unskilled labor means that getting a college degree now is more important than ever. And women are getting more college degrees. Now, women are also gaining on men in terms of some data that is not positive, such as the number of women that engaged in extramarital affairs, alcoholism in women, because being in the workforce turns out sucks kind of and is stressful. But there are also negative demographics. But these two, education and income, are vitally important and are the most important legacy of second wave feminism. So that's the feminist movement. That is second wave feminism. Now to summarize this entire lecture, the rights revolution lecture itself. There is a lot that can be said about it. And obviously, I left out a lot of stuff. I left out the Mexican civil rights movement, the Native Americans, gay rights movement. There is so much more that can be said, but we just delved deep into those two. But I just want to emphasize that there are a lot of other movements happening, rights movements happening during this period. And it's all groups, including the disabled, environmentalists. There's rights groups popping up all over the place. And If you'd like to know more, there, of course, there are graduate classes, or there are upper-level history classes that talk about this. So just looking at these two groups, to summarize the entire rights revolution, there are a couple points. First and foremost, none of this could have happened without the federal government and the federal courts. Second Reconstruction in civil rights, the civil rights movement and second wave feminism could not have taken place without the federal government. Part of the reason, I told you at the very beginning of the semester, one theme of U.S. history is the federal government gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it does it in all sorts of ways, regulating business, as we get corporations and businesses get bigger, regulating business, the military, that is a massive one. Welfare, especially Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and advancing racial and gender equality and equal rights for all Americans. That is a fundamentally important reason for the federal government to expand. There are politicians and people that argue that the Civil Rights Act was unnecessary because states would have taken care of it. And if you just let capitalism run its course, then segregation would have ended because businesses would have hurt, and so there's no need for the federal government to step in. There is very little evidence to support that belief. And there is a ton of evidence to support the idea that, or to support the fact that states were not moving in the direction of providing equality. So the federal government had to step in to create equality for these things. And that is really important to know because we will get into this in a future lecture, but one of the reasons that you will so frequently hear people rail against the federal government is only bad, is because of the rights revolution. And because none of it could have happened without the federal government and the federal courts. The second significance of the rights revolution is the creation of rights consciousness and identity politics. Now, as a generalization, most people agree that it is good that minority groups, women, the aged, the disabled, have greater equality in life, greater legal equality and greater opportunity. So, rights consciousness, understanding what everyone's rights as American citizens are, that is very important. But there is a negative to it. And it is that when taken to an extreme, which we have, everyone is looking out for themselves. And in a system where everyone is looking out for themselves, that is what is called tribalism. Well, I introduced at the very beginning of this. Tribalism is everyone looking out for themselves, their rights, and their group or their tribe. And what that leads to, and what we are experiencing, is fracturing of the society, a disregard for others. And it is part of the reason that the United States in the 2020s is the most politically divided it's been since the 1850s, right before the Civil War. The United States is more than 330 million people, and how diverse it is insane. No one group has a monopoly on what is right. No one state, no one region, no one party has a monopoly on what is correct. But the United States has become more divided than ever, and not only is it is divided by what's called negative partisanship. That is, building political identities based on a shared hatred and victimization. And victimization has become a crucial part of party identity. We are being oppressed. That is the whole woke versus anti-woke obsessions. That is negative partisanship. And negative partisanship is dangerous for all sorts of reasons. And it is caused by all sorts of things. It is caused by a confluence of conditions like income inequality, declining trust in democratic institutions, demographic changes, different sources of information. Our two parties have different facts essentially, and what it leads to, which is really dangerous, is intergroup empathy gap. I mentioned this at the beginning of this lecture, studied by Harvard professor Mina Sakara, and this means enjoying seeing pain and harm in others. That is a very human thing. That is not just an American thing. It's definitely not just an American in the 21st century thing. That is the norm in human history. We've gone through phases where we don't have it, but it is, as a society, it is a regression. The level of partisanship and the intergroup empathy gap, that is a regression to a less civilized world. So, rights consciousness, it is not good or bad. There are positives and negatives. And that's true of most everything. The third significance of the rights revolution is Newton's third law of physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the reaction to the rights revolution will be a conservative resurgence that will reject what was considered standard during most of the Cold War and what's called the Reagan Revolution, which we'll talk about next.